I thought that would get some more hands, right? All right. All right, I did want to spend more time on this chapter than chapter 8, so in terms of like questions about exam proportion, chapter 8 is not going to be that much. Okay. Most of us do not think of sleep as a behavior, right? How many of you have ever thought about sleep as a behavior? You don't really think about it there, right? It's like, oh, I'm asleep, I'm done, I'm unplugged, don't have to worry about anything. The problem with that, Charity, is that actually there's a lot of stuff going on while you're asleep, right? Your brain is still cooking, okay? And it's still processing and it's doing its business. And we need to let it do that, right? So that you can stay healthy. We want to ask, what is sleep? So we'll talk about that. Why do we sleep? What are the mechanisms of sleep? A few disorders of sleep, we'll sprinkle those in as we need to. And we will also discuss biological clocks. We'll talk a little bit about the hypothalamus, suprachiasmatic nucleus. We'll talk about what makes you know it's daytime or not daytime, kind of fun stuff. Does that work? All right, so there's the brain. Some of the places we will be talking about today: suprachiasmatic nucleus, hypothalamus, not a big deal. So what is sleep? Right? What do we mean by sleep? It is a behavior, right? It is something that you do. And it is actually motivated by the insistent urge of sleepiness, right? I mean, like nobody's ever defined sleep as that before, but that's what we're talking about, right? How many of you have ever been sleepy? If you're sleepy right now, believe me, I can tell because I can watch you nod off and drool. You should always bring a few napkins with you to class. All right, Eric planned ahead. He's like, I've got some paper towels over here in case somebody needs them. So that doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what's going on in our brains, so we should spend a little time doing that. There are a few things that we can do to determine what is your stage of sleep, right? And Alex, this is going to be important because each stage of sleep has a different sort of signature of brain phenomenon, body phenomenon, but also it tells us different things are happening, right? So we want to think about this. So there are a couple measurements that we can take. One of these is an electromyogram. We're going to record from people's muscles, right? Okay. Most people move less when they sleep than when they're awake, just as a heads up there. There are a few people who still move a lot when they sleep. Some of those people have sleep disorders. We'll talk about that, right? You can also do an electrooculogram. So this will measure sort of electrical potentials from your eyes. So it's going to measure eye movements. How many of you have heard of rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep? Yeah, so your eyes are moving rapidly then, right? They're not moving rapidly the rest of the time, so you can tell whether you're in REM or non-REM sleep sort of by that simple approach. Here's like a really weird picture of a girl with stuff adhered to her face. So I don't know if anybody has ever had a sleep study performed. Yeah. So what they're going to do to you, they're going to put you in a new place like you've never slept before. They're going to stick a bunch of stuff on your face. They're going to have people watch you all night, which is a little creepy. And then they're going to say, hey, try to get a good night's sleep. How well is that going to work? It's not, right? I mean, I don't know. How many of you, well, don't answer that. I'm not even going to ask. I was going to say, how many of you would enjoy like a bunch of people in lab coats standing around your bed watching you sleep? And I was afraid someone would raise their hand. It's like, see, Jason, you maybe it was you, right? And I just didn't want to know that about you. So there you go. But with these electrodes, we can measure brain activity, we can measure muscle activity, and we can measure eye movement as well. You can't really measure, I mean, you'd have to put maybe, yeah, so you have like, measure eyes. All right. What are the stages of sleep? What are we looking for in these stages of sleep? What's going on? We really want to think about your brain, right? Your brain is highly active while you are asleep. Now, the activity pattern of your brain is going to be different when you're awake and when you're asleep, right? When you are awake, your brain activity is a reflection of your environment. Whatever is around you, whatever you're doing, whatever you're thinking about, your brain is responding to that, right? And if we measure EEG activity, right? So that's going to be the electroencephalogram. We're going to measure sort of brain waves, right? That pattern is not really going to be a pattern. It's going to be this asynchronous sort of mess of low amplitude signals, right? And the reason for that is, in the real world, you don't get all of your stimulation at once and then all that stimulation goes away, right? So your neurons are going to be, some are going to be active, some are not going to be active. This is going to vary moment by moment, and at any given moment, as many are going to be active as not active, and so you kind of get this up and down small amplitude, right? It's a rather loud noise, wasn't it? So, when you're asleep, not so important that you're plugged into your environment. In fact, Jason, you shouldn't be, right? So at that time, your brain can go into these sort of oscillating signals, right? So when you are in deep sleep, this is where we're going. When you're in deep sleep, all of your neurons, not all, but a good number of them in your cortex can kind of fire at once, and then maybe they're not. And then they're going to be active, and then they're not, right? And so what we will get then are these higher amplitudes and these slow waves, right? We're not connected to the outside world, okay? I've got an image that you'll see in a moment that will make some sense. But let's talk our way through this first. When you're awake, there are sort of two types of activity that we talk about. We talk about alpha activity. That's going to be very smooth. That's going to be this sort of 8 to 12 hertz, right? So this is kind of smooth activity. That's when you're going to be relaxed, right? So you're just kind of sitting on the couch, not really doing anything important. You're not really actively engaged in things. You're not asleep, right? Okay. You're awake. This is kind of smooth, relaxed brain activity. Beta activity is when you're aroused, right? When you're engaged in something, when you're up moving around, when you're thinking about something. Hopefully most of you right now are in beta activity. I know some of you are flipping over to alpha activity periodically, right? I can tell that. It happens to the best of us. This is going to be irregular activity, and it's going to be in that 13 to 20 hertz frequency. It's going to be a higher frequency, right? Because it's going to be less synchronized. Okay. Stage 1 sleep is what we call theta activity. Not a big deal, slightly slower, right? Often if you're in theta activity, if you're in that stage 1 and someone asks you, were you asleep? Travis, you'll say no, I wasn't. In fact, you were. That's okay, right? Doesn't take much to get into that stage 1. Stage 2, sort of more of the same. We're getting more synchronous, we're getting slower. Occasionally you'll have what we call sleep spindles. These are these short bursts, right, of high frequency activity periodically. You'll also occasionally have what's called a K-complex. These are these sudden and sharp waveforms. I'll show you what those look like. But we kind of have this asynchronous activity, and then all of a sudden we're going to snap into this big slow waveform and then pop out of that. Stage 3, we're looking for what's called delta activity. This is going to be activity less than 4 hertz. That's really slow, right? It's a really slow 4 cycles per second in the EEG. Stage 4, you're going to have more delta activity, more than 50% of the time, right? It's called slow wave sleep or non-REM sleep. Not a big deal. Finally, you have, when you get into REM sleep, your REM sleep activity is actually going to look nearly identical to your beta activity, right? So that awake, aroused activity. Your eyes are moving rapidly. You're sort of having that asynchronous activity. Here's what we mean by something that is synchronous versus asynchronous. Trace B is going to be from sometime when you're awake, right? So this is awake activity. Remember, low amplitude, each neuron or number of neurons, some are activated and some are not. They're not all firing at the same time. It's going to be this desynchronous sort of thing. If we get all these guys timed up together, then we have this very synchronous activity. Notice it's a larger waveform, it's slower, right? So if you measure the peaks here, you can sort of measure these independent peaks. So it'd be really hard to measure all the peaks in this waveform, right? They're just all over the place, okay? So higher frequency when you're awake, lower frequency when you're asleep. Higher amplitude when you're asleep, right? Because you have all of your neurons kind of firing in the same direction at any given time, right? When you're awake, they're all firing independently, going in different directions. All right, so REM sleep, really the difference here is going to be rapid eye movement versus non-REM rapid eye movement. So in slow wave sleep, other stages of sleep, your eyes really aren't moving that much. REM sleep, they're moving all over the place. All right, so here are your stages of sleep, and you can see the different kinds of activity. When you're awake, this is your alpha activity versus your beta activity. Not a big deal. Notice as you move down to these deeper stages of sleep, you get larger waveforms but fewer peaks, right? That's the story. Your cortical cells, because this is all measured from cortex, are firing together the deeper stages of sleep, right? They don't need to be responding to anything in the world because you're completely disconnected from that, right? Your eyes are closed, you're not really getting any kind of sensory input. When you get back into REM sleep, we're going to see activity similar to what we saw when you were awake. Questions about that? It's not so complicated, right? All right. How many of you have ever slept 8 hours in one night? It's happened a couple times to you. Right? It's happened on a regular basis. No. That's okay. You'll die like 10 years early. Whatever, right? It works for different people. Actually, you may not die, but you'll definitely get Alzheimer's sooner. So that's so why do we sleep? I guess I should tell you this, right? You sleep because you need to clean up your brain because it's full of junk, right? Throughout the day, your cells throughout your entire body are constantly doing things, right? Okay? And your brain is constantly doing stuff. And every time it does something, it has some metabolic waste. And that metabolic waste builds up over time. We'll talk more about this later. At night, your brain needs to clean up all of that metabolic waste, needs to get rid of that. If you don't do that, then that metabolic waste just kind of hangs around and it gums up the works, right? And it can really cause you some cognitive deficits, short-term and long-term. So make sure you get plenty of sleep. Also, word to the wise, blacking out and sleeping are two different things. Eric, not everybody's at that point where they know the difference. It happens. All right, so this is for some theoretical person that sleeps 8 hours a night. If you sleep more or less than this, then something is going to be different, right? So you may have fewer or more of these peaks. In general, you obviously start out awake. You go through your stages of sleep. You're going to pop back out. You do this throughout the night. What you notice is as you go through the night, you spend longer in REM sleep each time that you pop into REM sleep. Right? It's going to gradually get longer. And you don't go to your deeper slow wave sleep stages, right? Early in your night's sleep, you're going to hit those slow wave sleep stages. Later in the night, you're not going to be doing that, okay? Which is pretty good if you think about this, because you don't want to wake up from slow wave sleep, right? Because that's like a big transition from from that synchronous cortical activity of slow waves, right? To all of a sudden you have to have that desynchronous high frequency, low amplitude, right? If you want to really make the easiest transition, you're going to want to go from REM sleep right into awake, right? So that makes a lot of sense, right, Travis? So this is how you should plan your night. It's not a bad idea. All right. How do you know the difference between REM sleep and non-REM sleep, right, or slow wave sleep? We already talked about the EEG difference, right? Asynchronous versus synchronous. Lack of muscle tone in REM sleep. Although this happens occasionally. Some people have REM sleep disorders. And, right, this happens. And occasionally, you will act out your dreams in the middle of your REM sleep. This can be okay if you're dreaming like you're cleaning your house, because then you've cleaned your house and you didn't realize it, and that's pretty cool. What is the problem is when you dream something that doesn't interact or match with your surroundings, right? And you can actually cause injury to you and someone else. So that can happen. Right? How many of you have been watching the Olympics? Nobody? That's fine. Somebody has, right? Okay. Regan, your favorite event, I'm quite convinced, is going to be ice dancing.
Actually, it's.
I don't know. So there we go. So ice dancing, let's imagine you have a dream that you are in the ice dancing competition, which is fine, perfectly normal dream. But let's imagine you don't have REM paralysis when that happens, and you get up and try to perform one of those maneuvers, and you like jump off your bed onto your dresser. That sounds painful. Right? You shouldn't do that. So that's why REM paralysis is sort of important. That's why you don't have any muscle tone during REM sleep. You do have rapid eye movements, non-rapid eye movements. Slow wave sleep, no genital activity. In REM sleep you do have some, so there's, watch out for that, I guess. There's like a whole story if you read the book about stamps. Did anybody read that story? Anybody read the book? Anybody want to ask about a roll of stamps? Everybody's going to ask about that, right? You want to, don't you?
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so I always wonder, like, how do I start these conversations, right? Like, hey, this may happen to some of you, so here's an easy way to figure out what's going on. But then again, it's not going to happen to most of you, so you don't have to worry about it. For erectile dysfunction, like, here's sort of a home test, right, to know if you have, like, physical or psychological erectile dysfunction, and you can use stamps. How many of you have ever purchased stamps? All right, Emily. So you get those at the post office typically, right? They used to come in rolls, and they still do, apparently, right? And so what you can, and they have little perforations.
I have questions.
Yeah?
I'm getting married, so. Like, had to buy, like, a bunch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go.
Send out stuff.
Oh, Lisa.
Yeah, get the connections.
Yeah, just wait. Okay. So you had to buy the stamps, right? Were they in a roll?
Yep.
Okay, well, all right. So you can take these rolls of stamps, right, and apply them to yourself at night, which seems a little uncomfortable. And there you go, right? Now people are on the same page, right? So if you apply these at night and you wake up in the morning and the perforations have been broken, then you know it's not like a physical issue that's causing erectile dysfunction, right? Because you're like going through the normal sort of phases there in your sleep, and it's probably a psychological issue. If for some reason the perforation is not broken, then it's probably a physical issue.
They do that in Sex and the City.
Yeah, it's a real thing. I mean, it's really.
Test to see if you would, you know.
Yeah, it's really it's a pretty standard sort of approach. So there you go. I don't know. It's up to you if you want to give that a try or not.
I'm gonna hide my roll of stamps now.
You're free to do whatever you want with your stamps. How's that? You can use those as you see fit. In REM sleep, you do have dreams. Probably there are dreams in slow wave sleep as well, but not entirely sure. All right, don't worry about that too much. All right, why do we sleep? Sleep is not a state of unconsciousness, right? So this is important. You are not unconscious while you are sleeping. There's a ton of mental activity going on, right? Remember all of that cleanup we were talking about? That's still going on, okay? Brain's still firing. That's why we have, look at all these EEGs. This is brain activity. All stages of sleep, you have brain activity, right? Stuff's going on. Okay, keep that in mind. Sleep is pretty much universal, especially among vertebrates. Vertebrates are animals with backbones, spines, right? All animals with a backbone, they're going to sleep, okay? What's really interesting is that warm-blooded vertebrates, which include mammals, birds are in that group as well, right? We actually have REM sleep, okay? But not all other species have that. So how many of you have a lizard? Yeah, Ray, what kind of lizard do you have? Crested geckos? Okay. They probably don't have REM sleep. They sleep, but it's not REM sleep. So I know that you probably had like this deep connection with your crested geckos and you thought you shared REM sleep with them. And that was like this really important bonding moment that you had with your lizards. But I hate to shatter that relationship and tell you you don't share REM sleep with lizards. So is that okay? I mean, are you okay? Okay, I just want to make sure you were going to make it through that. But they still sleep, so that's cool. What's really interesting is that really there's not a lot of evidence that says you have to sleep for normal body functions, right? So for like your liver and your heart and all of that stuff to still do its business, sleep's not really required for that, okay? Doesn't mean rest isn't required, that's a different story, but sleep's not really required. Sleep is required for sort of keeping your cognitive abilities sharp, right? If you don't sleep, your cognitive abilities decline pretty quickly. Okay, Jared, just keep that in mind. How many of you have ever skipped a night of sleep? It happens, right? Now, the following night, let's say you did go to sleep, you're going to go through what's called a rebound phenomenon, right? So you may, if you're given the opportunity, you will actually sleep longer than normal. So normally if you sleep 8 hours, that's your normal cycle, and you don't sleep one night, the following night you might sleep 12 hours, right? If you're given that opportunity. You're not always given that opportunity, right? The other thing that you will do is actually you will preferentially catch up on REM sleep. So rather than spending that extra time in slow wave sleep, you'll try to spend it in REM sleep, which really tells us something about the importance of REM sleep, right? So REM sleep is probably a little more important than slow wave sleep. Okay. Hey, who loves dolphins? Nobody? No, everybody hates dolphins. We should kill all the dolphins. Let's get rid of those things. They're useless. Right, Eric? I mean, you're really agreeing to this. I don't like dolphins. What's a dolphin good for? Anybody ever? No. But dolphins have an interesting thing, and they sleep in an interesting way. So do ducks, by the way. Dolphins sleep 1/2 of their brain at a time. It's pretty weird, right? So they'll turn off like their right cortex, and their right cortex will go to sleep. Their left cortex will stay awake, and then after a period of time, they'll flip that. Now, if you think about this, why would they do that? How many of you have ever been in the ocean? Okay, Eric, you've been in the ocean. While you were in the ocean, did you ever notice a dolphin bed? They don't have beds, do they? What they do have are predators, right? And if you are a dolphin and you go to sleep, one, you're going to have to go to sleep like at the surface of the water so you can keep breathing, right? Because they don't breathe underwater, they actually breathe air. And so you're a dolphin, let's imagine you're a dolphin, and you're floating along at the top of the ocean, okay? Because you're just going to float. You're going to have both of your eyes closed, you're asleep, so imagine that. There you are, just floating along peacefully. Wham! A shark just ate you. And you didn't see it coming, right? But if you're only sleeping one side of your brain at a time, you've still got one side of your brain alert and doing, you can know when that shark's coming, you can be good to go. So, these are EEGs from dolphins. This is awake for the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere. Notice one side goes into intermediate sleep and then slow wave sleep, while the other hemisphere stays awake. And then it's going to flip. That's pretty cool, right? Ducks will actually do the same thing. How many of you love ducks? They're all right. They're one of the least annoying birds. Pigeons being the most. So ducks, Jasmine, this is really fascinating about ducks. When they sleep in a circle, right? And so the ducks in the middle of the circle, they shut down both hemispheres at the same. They're just out, floating there on top of the water, doing their business. Just sleeping ducks. The ducks on the outside, they'll swim in a circle. They will put their inner hemisphere, like their inner eye, whatever this will be, like the outer, they'll put that side to sleep, right? So if their left eye is facing inside, because ducks have eyes on the sides of their heads, right? They'll put their right hemisphere to sleep, leave their left hemisphere open, and they'll have their right eye open, because they'll be looking toward the outside for predators, right? That's pretty cool. And if they swim the other direction, they'll do the other thing. And then sometimes they'll like swap with the ducks that have been sleeping both hemispheres simultaneously. So I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about like figuring out how I can sleep one hemisphere at a time. I mean, the problem is I'm going to walk in a circle while I'm doing that, but because I'm only going to be moving to one side of my body. But if I'm seated, I can still use one arm, right? Think about like all of the extra work you can do. I actually think that's the wave of the future. Unilateral sleep. Not bilateral sleep, unilateral sleep. Once we figure that out, Eric, watch out. Because then we will figure out how to live on Mars. Nobody's interested in living on Mars. We do know that slow wave sleep, though, even though I said REM sleep is probably more important, we do know that slow wave sleep is important for survival. It helps reduce free radicals, right? These are molecules that fly around causing damage to your body. So watch out for those. There's also something called fatal familial insomnia, right? This is an inherited genetic disorder that you have this progressive insomnia. After a short period of time, once you have the onset of symptoms, you die. So not a real positive, uplifting story, but there you go. Now, most people have not experienced insomnia. Having difficulty sleeping is not insomnia, right? So it's clear there's sort of two different things. We've all probably experienced difficulty sleeping. Some people maybe have had insomnia for a brief period of time. So if you actually have had insomnia, don't worry that you're going to die because of the insomnia. What about REM sleep? Definitely promotes brain development, facilitates learning, right? And we already talked about that REM rebound phenomenon. Facilitates learning. There is a ton of data out there that tells you, despite the fact that you don't listen to it, that tells you if you actually would just sleep the night before an exam, you would do better than staying up all night studying. Right, Olivia? The best thing you can ever do before an exam is take a nap. That's what I did. I never studied when I was in college, so you shouldn't study. And I would just take a nap when I got to class. It worked. Well enough. Emily, you're not going to try that, are you? Give it a try. Take a nap. Next, just put your head down on the desk next week, because you guys have an exam next Tuesday, right, Elizabeth? When I come in, I want to see everyone like this. On the desk, little puddle of drool, so I know you've been sleeping for a while. Think you could do that? Nobody's going to do that, are they? How many of you are going to be up until 3 a.m. the night before studying? Yeah, bad choice. You should only stay up until 3 a.m. to play Madden football. People still play that? Is that a game still? That's still a game, right? That game still exists. Okay, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. You guys probably play something else these days, though, right? We already talked about fatal familial insomnia. There are obviously some attention and memory deficits. You do sort of have this dreamlike, confused state for most of the time, right? So you're going to have things going on. Your autonomic nervous system gets way out of control, right? Your body temperature goes up. You can't control your endocrine system. You've got all kinds of problems. So sleep, you need it. You should get it. All right, we already talked about REM rebound sleep. No worries there. Consolidation of long-term memories, definitely sleep helps in this, right? REM sleep does it for non-declarative memory. Slow wave sleep does it for declarative memory. This is why taking a nap before an exam will work. If you had to get into REM sleep, it wouldn't probably work, Jared, because remember how long it takes to get into REM sleep? But you can get into slow wave sleep. You can do that pretty quickly. If you can train yourself to jump into slow wave sleep pretty quickly, take a 10-minute nap before an exam. Your grade will go up somewhere between negative 15% and 12%. Hey, there you go. Here is the, look at this. Discrimination improvement, no nap, people's performance decline. Now, if you got slow wave only, you did okay, but if you had slow wave and REM sleep, so you get a nice nap there, you can do okay. So I think we should install like sleeping bunks in the classroom building so people can go in there and take a nap and then like come back out and take their exams. Does that seem helpful to anybody? No? That's why I think those people with those hammocks, right? You guys see those people with hammocks on campus? Do you guys have a hammock? Yeah. So you should sleep in it before class on Tuesday.
Like pretty comfy.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a hammock. That's why they invented hammocks. Because they were comfortable. Nobody's going to invent a hammock that's not comfortable. This is counterintuitive.
True.
All right, so there you go. Slow wave sleep and learning. Mirror tracing works for all kinds of stuff. Oh, hey, who wants to know about the physiological aspects of sleep? That seems pretty exciting, right? We've got some time. What actually makes you fall asleep?
Breathing.
Breathing? That's a good guess.
Melatonin?
Melatonin is something else that's going to play a role in sleep. We'll talk about melatonin later. And I'm going to, here's a spoiler alert, I don't recommend taking melatonin for a variety of reasons. Cost is one, right? Because melatonin costs more than zero, so I'm sort of like not about spending money. Two, there's actually a study a few years ago with mice where they gave mice doses of melatonin over some period of time, and they actually, and I don't know, right? Like what you think about these things like who thinks of doing this study, Jason? But they found that the gonads for the mice actually decreased in size as they were on melatonin. So.
What about sleep paralysis?
Yeah, we'll talk about that too. Yeah, that's a thing. We'll talk about that when we get to sleep disorders in just a few moments. So I suggest stay off the melatonin if you can, especially if you like your gonads the size that they are right now. Yeah, Matt. By the way, I'm going to assume, and if it's otherwise, you just don't tell me. I'm going to assume all of you have gonads. So.
There's like precursor tryptophan or something.
Yeah, we'll talk about tryptophan, serotonin. We'll talk about histamine.
It was like the precursor. I mean, it was on one of the quizzes. It was like a precursor tryptophan aids in sleep or something like that, or doesn't.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a moment. No worries, hang in there. So for those of you that don't think you have gonads, you have ovaries. Those are the same, right? They do the same. And size is important because your hormone levels, right? You don't want to like decrease your hormone levels right at the moment. All right. So here's what actually makes you go to sleep. You actually create constantly, you're doing it right now, a sleep-promoting substance, right, while you're awake. And while you're asleep, you just destroy that. Well, that makes sense, right? And that's kind of straightforward. The longer you're awake, the longer you need to sleep so you can deactivate that substance, right, Eric? This explains why when you don't sleep one night, you want to sleep more the next night, right? Because you have more of that substance that has built up that you need to destroy, okay? And in fact, because of that REM sleep and the non-REM sleep, they're sort of two separate pots. There might actually be two different substances. At the moment, it seems as though, we'll talk about something called adenosine. That this is the guy, should be an eye in there. This is the actual sleep-promoting substance that you create. It is a metabolic byproduct, right? So anytime your cells are processing energy, right? So ATP and so forth, you're going to have adenosine as a byproduct of that. And that's going to build up over time. Once it gets so high, you're just going to fall over and go to sleep. So that's fine. That's probably what you should do. This is a better way to spend your time. Just like stay awake until you fall over, right? And then just sleep until you wake up, and then do the same thing again. But nobody's going to do that.
What about naps?
Yeah, what about naps? Naps are for losers.
I mean,
Did Einstein take like a 20-minute nap every 8 hours?
Who?
Einstein?
I don't know.
He had the regular sleep nap.
You know, people say so much about Einstein, and I think 18% of it's true. But yeah, I think he did take a lot of naps. Also, once you're Einstein, you know, you can do whatever you want. And so I think I might choose to take naps when I get there as well, which would probably never happen. But right, Eric? I think like if you're Einstein, you could take an hour nap every hour. I mean, that's up to you. Doesn't really work that way, does it?
Nap didn't check out.
Yeah, yeah. You're okay on leap year because you get that extra few seconds. Naps. What about naps? Yeah, naps will. If you need like a midday adenosine breakdown, take a nap.
okay, so like someone who like naps and instead of like sleeping or something like that, are they gonna like, what did you use, what is it that you said that they get Alzheimer's?
Yeah, they're probably not going to get the full benefits because they're not going through that full slow wave sleep and REM sleep cycle like they should.
Okay.
So I would not recommend only napping. That's probably not going to work. We should talk about this flip-flop circuit. You cannot simultaneously, just in case you want to know, you cannot simultaneously be awake and asleep. Okay? Can't do it. You can try. It's not going to happen. You're going to be one or the other. And that's why we have this flip-flop circuit. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. That's going to be something important. All right, so adenosine, this is the guy we're talking about. It is a neuromodulator. It's released by neurons engaged in high levels of activity. And it does play that role in the initiation of sleep. How many of you have ever ingested caffeine? How many of you have done it with the explicit purpose of staying awake? Yeah, right? The reason adenosine, or the reason caffeine works is it actually blocks adenosine receptors. And it makes you think, right? It makes your nervous system appear to have less adenosine, so you're not going to be as sleepy, right? The adenosine is still there. Okay. And when the caffeine stops blocking those adenosine receptors, then the adenosine is still going to be there and it's still going to have its effect, right? So it doesn't make the adenosine go away. It simply blocks the receptors temporarily. So you should just constantly ingest caffeine so you'll always stay awake, right?
Good plan.
Good plan. All right, so here you go. There's adenosine receptors. Look at all that adenosine coming out. Oh, you're getting sleepy. Getting super sleepy. You are asleep. But instead, we're going to take some caffeine. Look at all that adenosine still at the synapse, not making you sleepy because you blocked it all with caffeine. Sounds exciting, right?
Is that when you crash, when you know what I mean? Like after you do like the powder energy or something like that, then it's just like once you've done block like the caffeine, is that just an overabundance of adenosine built up and
You're still building it. Not only is the adenosine still there that you had before, you're going to keep more adenosine building up, right? And so when that caffeine stops blocking those receptors, that adenosine is still there. You're absolutely right. And it's even more than you had before. So it's going to hit you pretty hard. In the world, adenosine always wins. It is impossible for you to stay awake forever. I tried it once in the 3rd grade and it didn't work. So there you go. What are you going to do? There are 5 neurotransmitters that help control sleep and wakefulness. We're going to talk about each of these just a little bit. Some of these we'll talk about more than others. Some of these we've already mentioned. We're going to talk a little bit about serotonin, we talked about acetylcholine, norepinephrine. Didn't really talk much about histamine or orexin, but we will talk about those. Exciting. Acetylcholine is important because it activates cortex and it creates cortical asynchrony or desynchrony, right? When these cholinergic neurons are activated, your cortex is excited, it's aroused, right? It's ready to go, vigilant. Desynchronous activity, so that's going to be awesome. Here you go, this is cortex activity. What's interesting is you get a boost, or acetylcholine activity. You actually get a boost in acetylcholine during REM sleep as well. It's not surprising because that cortical activity, again, mimics waking. What's really interesting about this is the sort of boost in acetylcholine that you get in the hippocampus. Who remembers that time, and only those of you who got a full night's sleep do, but who remembers that time I told you that sleep helps consolidate memories, right? The hippocampus is involved in memories, so you're probably going to see some increase in hippocampal activity during certain stages of sleep, right? So you can consolidate those memories. Here's a wrap brain showing you where acetylcholine goes. We're really interested in that cortex projection. Not a big deal. Again, a little more information about norepinephrine. I'm not going to ask you too much about it. Just keep in mind that norepinephrine is also involved in arousal and vigilance. Okay. You can measure the firing rate of norepinephrine or noradrenergic cells. When you're awake, they're fairly high. As you get closer to sleep, they start to drop off, right? And then while you're asleep, you have pretty low activity. Those cells, that makes sense. But when you wake up, your activity levels in those noradrenergic cells go back up to normal. They stay up there for a while.
Is that part of why people with anxiety disorders have such a hard time to sleep sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to go to sleep if your norepinephrine levels are high, right? And if your norepinephrine levels are pretty high, you're going to be pretty anxious, right? This is actually one reason why you will, if you take any kind of medication that blocks sort of norepinephrine, you can kind of, it'll help you to sleep and so forth. But yeah, norepinephrine, it's going to be, again, it's noradrenaline, right? So it's that, it's the adrenaline rush, right? I don't know anybody who's ever fallen asleep in the middle of an adrenaline rush. And that's sort of impossible to do, so keep that in mind. There you go, there's a wrap brain, don't worry about it. Serotonin, we've talked about serotonin before. Projects to a lot of places in the brain. Okay. Again, serotonin levels, you're going to have different amounts of serotonin through your sleep. So we're going to keep an eye on that. This is why SSRIs, I don't know if anybody's ever heard of one on an SSRI, one of the side effects is sleepiness. It's one of the big side effects of SSRIs because you're going to be increasing serotonin levels in the brain, and so you're going to increase the amount of serotonin. Histamine is another neurotransmitter we should think about. How many of you have ever taken Benadryl and then you took a nap? Yeah, so it's an antihistamine, right? So blocking histamine is going to make you sleepy. So it actually is important for wakefulness and arousal. How many of you try to give annoying neighbor kids Benadryl so they'll leave you alone? Huh?
My dad accidentally gave it to me whenever I was like a junior in high school. Before school, I just had like itchy eyes, and he thought he'd give me the non-drowsy kind, and then I had to drive to school, and it was like a 30-minute period, and so I'm driving to school and I'm starting to fall asleep, and then I slept through 2 periods. Like, my teacher just let me sleep in the corner because I was like, I can't be awake.
Well, that's interesting.
And then I got home and I was like, Dad, you gave me a real Benadryl, I'm not non-drowsy. And he just started laughing hysterically.
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny. I mean, aside from the part where you could have had a car accident.
Yeah.
But you didn't.
Yeah,
So it is funny.
Here I am.
Yeah. I like to pass it out at Halloween as candy.
You tell them not to chew it?
Yeah. It's like, this is the kind of candy you just swallow. Sometimes you can get the liquid form, they can wash it down that way. Give them a double dose.
Going to jail, man.
Huh?
Going to jail.
Can you go to jail for giving kids Benadryl? You'd say you could? That's,
If you're not the parent.
If you're not the parent, I just can't go randomly give kids medication. Actually, I've only lived like in my entire sort of like independent adult life. There's only like 1 year that I've actually had people come by for Halloween. I gave them like plastic straws. They were like Halloween themed straws. They were actually really popular. So they looked like pumpkins or something, and it was like a little ghost. I don't know.
No one came back after that?
Huh?
No one came back after that?
No, actually, unfortunately, people did. They came back the same night. They were like, "Hey, do you have any more of those straws?" I'm like, "No, I don't." but I'm glad you were excited about it. And then we moved. And then we actually lived in a neighborhood once that did trick or treat. They did trick or treat at like 4:30. It's like I wasn't even home. So like, the first year we lived there, we bought like, Halloween candy's expensive, right? So I bought like, I was like, I'm gonna have a lot of people come by, because there were like, unfortunately, a lot of kids in the neighborhood. So I bought all this candy, because I was like, I don't want my house egged. And so far they've left me alone, and so I'm gonna try to stay on good terms with the neighborhood kid gang, right? So I invested all of this money in candy, and then we get home from work, and it's like, hey, where are all the kids? And like one of the neighbors is like, oh, they came through at like 4:30. What they do is like get off the bus in their costumes. I don't know. So anyway, since then, I've lived in places that don't have trick-or-treaters, so I'm kind of excited about that. I just, I'm gonna eat candy, I'll just buy my own candy. But then I had to eat like all of that candy. All right, so histamine, oh, hey, orexin. How many of you have heard of orexin? Yeah, not so many people, right, man? It's kind of a new one. I mean, it's not a new one like in the world, but it's like a new one to you, right? Because it's how some people talk about it. It's actually kind of cool. Orexin has an excitatory effect, right? What's really interesting about this is rats that are engaged in exploratory activity, you'll actually see a high firing rate of their orexin. When they're out kind of like checking out their environment, their orexin neurons are going to get really excited about that. So that's pretty cool. How many of you have ever like explored your environment before? You just, like, go around and be like, hey, I'm going to try to find the closest 7-Eleven where I won't get shot. It's in Beckley. just I don't know if there's a 7-Eleven in Beckley. And you may get shot there too, I have no idea. Try Maryland.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Baltimore, you said? Oh, okay.
There are other parts of Maryland, briefly. Hey, check this out. Look at the activity of orexin neurons when you're awake, and then look at the activity of orexin neurons when you're not awake. That's a big difference, right? So there you go. Not a complicated story. All right, here are all the chemicals we talked about, all in one nice chart, telling you levels in different sleep stages. Don't worry, oh, yeah, do worry about this a little bit. We want to think about some of these brain regions. In particular, we're going to talk about this flip-flop circuit, which is going to be kind of cool. This diagram that you see here is important, but it's not nearly as important as the next like 3 diagrams I'm going to show you, where I take this and plug it into larger circuits, right? So pay attention to this. What we're going to do is we're going to add and we're going to build on this, right? But this is the basic sleep-wake flip-flop. So I recall this time when I told you you cannot simultaneously be awake and asleep, right? You can't. And the reason for that is you have this concept, or this concept of mutual inhibition. Okay? There is an area called the ventrolateral preoptic area, VLPOA. This is a sleep-promoting area. When this guy is active, you will go to sleep. Okay? When that area is active, it will inhibit the brainstem. The brainstem is responsible for 4 of the 5 neurotransmitters that we've discussed that are important for controlling sleep-wake. Okay? Everything but orexin. So, when your VLPOA is active, your brainstem is inhibited. That means you're asleep. If the brainstem is activated, it's going to be inhibiting that sleep-promoting region. It's that simple. You cannot turn them both on or both off. One's going to be on or the other one's going to be on. That's why it's called a flip-flop, not a sliding scale. Does that make sense to everybody? Well, look at this. Remember that time I told you I was going to add stuff? I just added something. What I added here was that 5th neurotransmitter, orexin, right? Orexin will actually keep the flip-flop on, right? Orexin will turn on your brainstem, so it'll turn on the other for systems. And it does this through, there are different motivations to remain awake, right? So there are things that can keep you awake. Later we'll talk about things that put you to sleep, but not a big deal. Okay? The orexinergic neurons, they're going to get inhibitory input from that VLPOA. That area, the ventrolateral preoptic area, is constantly trying to put you to sleep. Constantly trying to do that. You're constantly trying to fight that. And most of the time you're going to be successful until you get too much adenosine. And it's going to overcome those orexinergic neurons. And they're going to turn off, and then you're going to go to sleep. Okay? Don't worry about this. This is just showing you some adenosine. Acetylcholine, don't worry about that. Oh, someone asked about REM paralysis. We should talk about that for a moment. Transitioning to REM sleep is important. Occasionally, this doesn't happen smoothly. Okay? Occasionally, you don't come out of REM sleep as smoothly as you would like. How many of you have ever thought a ghost was choking you while you were asleep? Kayla, has it ever happened to you? No? It happens to people from time to time. So REM paralysis is when it happens all the time. You go into REM sleep, you're paralyzed. You're not going to be moving, right? You shut down the parts of your body that move, because if they did move, Regan over here would be doing whatever ice dancing move she was going to do and probably kick someone, right? And that can be dangerous. But there are times where that transition doesn't go perfectly, right? So sometimes you will still be paralyzed, but you will wake up, right? And you will not be able to move, and that can really freak you out. Has that ever happened to anybody? Yeah, it happens sometimes. Don't worry about it. I mean, if it happens like every 5 minutes, worry about it. If it happens occasionally, you're all right. So what will happen is you will actually still be in that sort of paralyzed state, right? But you will actually be awake and collecting data from the world, right? Now the problem with that is you're going to feel like there's like some pressure on your chest, because you're not going to be able to move, right? And this is why some people will make up stories, right? They'll have these sort of like dreams, because your brain will make up a story that will make sense to you, right, Jason? And if you can't move, there's got to be a reason for that. And if you're having trouble breathing and you can't see what it is that's not letting you breathe, it's got to be a ghost, right? And that makes a lot of sense on some level, right? So, REM paralysis, you're going to have that kind of a rough transition there, in and out of REM sleep. Not a big deal. Don't worry about it too much, unless, again, it's happening to you all the time. Okay? Those are just parts of REM sleep control. I'm not going to really ask you about that. Here is the REM flip-flop, just to give you an idea. Orexinergic neurons are still playing a role in that, right? Things that will keep you awake are going to be like biological signals that let you know it's daylight. Hunger signals will also do that. How many of you have ever gone to sleep hungry? It's difficult, right? Okay. Nobody likes to go to sleep hungry. Okay? This is one of the reasons why it's sometimes difficult to lose weight, right? Because one of the things they tell you to do is don't eat late at night. That's what they always tell you, right? Like, boy, if I just didn't eat late at night, I'd lose a lot of weight. The problem with that is like going to sleep while you're hungry is not an easy thing to do, right? Okay, because your body thinks you're going to starve overnight. By the way, that's why that happens. So you got to watch out for that. How many of you have ever eaten and then you're like, boy, I'm really tired. I just had I don't know, what are they? I don't know. I'm trying to think of. I know they sell cheeseburgers at Fat Patties, but I don't know what they're called. Let's imagine you have a Fat Patty cheeseburger, and then all of a sudden that makes you go to sleep, right? Wow, that's why they should put napping stations in at restaurants. Now this is a money-making idea. I don't know why you guys are so against this. So I should tell you, you want to hear a story about taking a nap in a bathroom?
A voluntary nap?
So maybe. When I was in graduate school, one of my lab mates was from Russia, and when he came into the United States, told me, he said, I was so excited when I got off the plane at the airport and I saw the sign that said restroom. And as many people are, if you have ever been on a flight of any distance, you are very excited to see the restroom when you get back into the airport, right? Because using the facility on the plane is not preferable. And so he gets so excited, he goes in and he starts looking for the napping stations, the places to sleep, because he thought he could go in there and rest, right? And he didn't understand why we call it a restroom when you're not really resting while you're in there. So there's a story about a nap in a bathroom. One that did not happen. He did not get to take a nap in the bathroom. So if anybody has ever tried to lie down on a toilet, you know that doesn't work very well. Nobody's tried that? And the diaper changing stations aren't rated for your weight. I'll tell you that. Because that's like the one place you think, like, I could take a nap there. It's just like, trust me, they come right out of the wall. Not designed for adults. Check this out. This is a diagram I would like tattoo to the inside of my eyelids if I were you. Or not. Whatever, right? So this is actually important. This shows you the orexin neurons. So it shows you their effect on the arousal system in the brainstem, their effect on REM sleep, shows you the effect of the amygdala, emotional stimuli. And this is kind of plugging everything together. This is a diagram to think about when we're thinking about that flip-flop, the role of the neurotransmitters in wakefulness, right? And that ventrolateral preoptic area in terms of inhibiting different brain regions so that you can actually go to sleep. So that's pretty cool. Don't worry about this too much. What you do really need to take from this is that if you are in REM sleep, you're going to activate inhibitory neurons that will then inhibit motor neurons so that you're not up moving around during REM sleep. Okay? Don't worry so much about the other sides of this. Unless, again, you're interested in rolls of stamps. Some sleep disorders, some of these are going to be important, some of them are not. So we'll talk a little bit about some of these. Sleep apnea, that's just when people stop breathing while they're sleeping. Don't worry about that. It's perfectly fine to hold your breath while you sleep. If you have sleep apnea, worry about it, but I'm not going to ask you about it. Cataplexy, that's kind of an interesting thing, a little different. This is when you have complete paralysis during waking, right? So people who are cataplexic, they will, in the midst of doing whatever it is they're doing, they will just be paralyzed. They don't actually go to sleep. They're still awake. They're still collecting sensory information. They just can't move. We already talked about sleep paralysis. We talked about these hallucinations sometimes that are a result of sleep paralysis. Sleep attacks, that's when you just suddenly go to sleep. That is narcolepsy, right? So it's narcoleptic. They'll just like randomly fall asleep. They actually go to sleep. They don't just like become paralyzed. So that's a thing to watch out for. You'll know if you're narcoleptic, right? You'll probably wake up with a lot of bruises on your forehead from like falling. Oh, sleep behavior disorder, we talked about this. This is for folks who do not become paralyzed during REM sleep. They get up and they do stuff. Some of these are pretty scary things they do. Some of them are not so scary. There's like sleep eating disorder, right, which is sort of related to this. People will get up and eat in the middle of the night. It can be very disorienting when you get up the next day and you're like, who broke into my house and ate my turkey sandwich? When it was actually you. So that, does that ever happen to you, Matt? You're like getting your fridge and you're like, who ate my turkey sandwich? Never happened.
It's weird that I go back to sleep after eating a turkey sandwich.
Yeah, it happens. So there you go, right? So they'll eat it. Sometimes it's really bad and they'll eat raw meat, which can cause problems, right? So then you do wake up, hopefully, and you have to deal with that. You're like, wow, why is this happening to me? And then why is like half of my ground beef gone? And yeah. You know, like someone broke in the middle of the night and force fed me ground beef while I was asleep. And it happens. So there you go. Some people will sleep drive. They will drive while they're asleep. That's bad. And then there was actually a case a few years ago where a guy killed his in-laws while he was asleep. Yeah, that got everybody's attention. He was acquitted though, which I think yeah, I know, right? So I would not try this, right? So there aren't. So don't try to like say like, oh, I've got a sleep behavior disorder, right?
How did he prove it? Did he just have like an episode and then?
Yeah, so they proved he had a sleep disorder, and it was, I mean, that's a tough one, right? I mean,
Did he like his in-laws?
huh?
Did he like his in-laws?
I don't know.
That would be really
I hope I imagine his defense lawyer said yes. Is what that would have been like step one of defense. Your in-laws are great, right? Oh yeah, yeah. We're great people.
Love him to death.
That was a good one, Matt.
Thanks.
Sleep eating disorder, we talked about that. Quite often if you have if you have sleep eating disorder, they'll give you an anti-seizure medication. Yeah.
What about neurological process, like when somebody is completely awake for several days and then they have like attacks where they'll just like immediately fall asleep, but only for like a couple of minutes, and then go right back to not sleeping?
Yeah. Wow. That seems interesting.
That was my life.
Wow. I don't know what was going on there. That's interesting. I hope you saw someone about that.
Yeah.
Good. That's what I would recommend first.
Yeah. They
Um,
didn't really have an explanation though, so.
yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I mean, falling asleep randomly is, I mean, if you can't sleep, obviously, it's just that makes some sense. Your sleep mechanisms are going to overtake eventually, right? Because you do need to sleep. Waking back up after a few moments and going back at it, I don't know. So there you go. I hope things are better now.
Significantly. Staying awake for 4 days straight away. That's your.
Yeah, that's a true story. Hey, who loves biological clocks? These are the kind where you have the potatoes and you stick the electrodes in and then no. Did you ever have one of those, Eric? Like where you can, so you guys know batteries, right? They really they work off like acid and, ion movement and so forth, right? You can make these with potatoes, right? You ever have one of those, Jared? Yeah, so that's a biological clock, right? It's not exactly what we're talking about here. I thought it was interesting. How many of you have heard of circadian rhythms? Yeah, this is a thing, right? So this is a rhythmical change in your behavior or your physiological process. It's going to be tied to the changes in the day, right? There are things called Zeitgebers. This is a German word for time giver. The sun is typically what we consider to be the best indicator of whether or not you should be awake, right? If the sun is up or visible to you, then you should probably be out doing things. If the sun is like not, then you should like be home asleep, right? That's kind of how that works. It's actually going to send information to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, right, which is in the hypothalamus, and it can reset these biological clocks. There are cells in your retina. Remember we talked about the retina and we said there were these retinal ganglion cells. Most of them were processing visual information. This is just collecting light and sending that to your suprachiasmatic nucleus to let you know if it's going to be time for you to be up or not. Interestingly, these are actually sensitive primarily to blue wavelengths of light. Okay? The sun throws out a bunch of blue light, right? Doesn't really throw out a whole lot of other kinds of light, but mostly blue. This is why many of you will have on your mobile devices red filters, like red shifting filters, right? That is in an attempt to prevent the activation of your hypothalamus by the blue light coming from your cell phone screen. So if you use your cell phone late at night before you go to bed, you're going to have difficulty sleeping because you're getting that blue wavelength of light that's the same as what's coming from the sun, which is telling you, hey, you should be awake. But in fact, you shouldn't be because you're actually in bed trying to, I don't know, check up on the latest news from whatever it is you guys care about. And you're going to be doing that. Use the red filter on your phone, right? That'll help. What's really interesting about this is it actually may not, some of it is going to be the sun, definitely, but temperature also plays a big role in your circadian rhythms, right? Outside temperature. There's a study a few years ago where they had some traditional societies. They had like maybe 1,500 people. They gave Fitbits to them. And so these researchers would track their sleep-wake cycles over the year. And what they found was that it wasn't exactly tied to sunrise and sunset, their sleep-wake cycles. A lot of it was the temperature. And so on days like in the winter, they would actually wake up later because the sun would still be up. The sun would be up longer, but it takes longer to warm up because the temperature's cooler than in the summer, and when they would actually stay up later after sunset because the temperature was still warm. So there you go, right? If you want a good night's sleep, keep it cold. Anybody ever been to sleep when they were hot? That doesn't work, does it? You can go to sleep cold though, but you can't go to sleep hot. Don't worry about this. This is rats running on a wheel. Suprachiasmatic nucleus, not so important. We talked about this day-night, head into that suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is kind of cool. This shows you that same circuit that we've looked at before, but we're going to plug in that biological time of day business, right? And if it is daylight, we're going to activate those orexinergic neurons, activating that arousal system. If not, we're not going to be doing that, and so the ventrolateral preoptic area will become active, and you'll go to sleep. Don't worry about this too much. Oh, hey, this is interesting. There are people who have advanced sleep phase syndrome or delayed sleep phase syndrome. These are folks who either cannot stay up late or cannot get up early, right? And it's not because you're lazy or Matt, you stayed up all night playing Call of Duty. This is an actual sleep disorder that some individuals have. That's why I have classes at 4. That way you can't claim that as an excuse, right? If you've got advanced sleep phase, you just go to bed as soon as you get home. If you've got delayed sleep phase, you woke up a few hours before class and you're good to go. So, no worries. Don't worry about the pineal gland. Any questions about sleep?